The inflation complication.
Cash avalanche berries Pittsburgh. Prices going haywire. Read all about it. Only $200 an issue. Extra. Wipe your shoes, kids. I don't want you bringing more money in the house again.
That'll be $5,000. $10,000, please. Exact change only. Two cavities. That'll be $40,000 per filling.
Well, at least some prices haven't gone up.
The high prices of the modern day are directly caused by the Great Depression, the desperate attempts to recover from it, and the resulting inflation. In other words, gas and groceries are expensive because of programs from 80 years ago, which seems a little strange. To fully understand how this works, one must understand the business cycle. The first part of the business cycle is the peak. Theoretically, the peak is when everyone has a job and the gross domestic product is at its highest. However, when everyone is employed, labor is more expensive and businesses can't afford to pay employees. These businesses are forced to fire people, who then lose their incomes and stop spending as much. This affects other companies who stop making money and also have to fire people. This chain reaction is called contraction. The GDP decreases at this point. When the GDP gets to its lowest point, there is a period called the trough. This is when few people are making money, many businesses are forced to close, and production is at an all-time low. Eventually, businesses start to make more money and hire more people, which starts a period called expansion. Expansion is the most productive part of the business cycle, where the GDP is constantly rising and more people are getting jobs. This eventually leads to another peak. The fact that the economy follows a set cycle is very helpful. One must also understand inflation so as to understand how it can affect the economy. Inflation is the steady increase in prices, lowering the purchasing power of the currency. This is most often caused by more money going into circulation. This most often happens when the Federal Reserve attempts to manipulate the business cycle, trying to shorten the trough and lengthen the expansion, which makes people earn more money. When people earn more money, they spend more, and producers raise prices. Inflation most often affects people with low incomes. Low-income people need all the money they earn, but inflation decreases the value of their money. This means they cannot buy as much and will struggle to survive. Inflation also affects interest rates. Let's say a borrower borrows $100 with a 5% interest rate. The inflation rate is also 5%. If the borrower pays off the loan 1 year later, then they will have to pay $105. However, because of inflation, that $105 will only be able to buy as much as the original $100 could. The lender will not make money this way, so he must raise the interest rate to make a profit. These problems were present after the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a huge economic collapse in the late 1920s that started in the stock market but quickly affected many other businesses. Many people believe that the stock market crash was caused by instability in the market itself, but it was actually caused by investors' financial insecurity. Optimistic speculation of the 1920s pushed the prices artificially high, so when they started going down a little bit, investors panicked. They all tried to sell their shares, and since everyone was selling, no one was buying. The demand for stocks plummeted, and the prices of shares were dragged with it. Hordes of people, scared that they would lose their savings, tried to withdraw their money from banks. However, the banks had lent the money to other people and did not have the hard cash to pay all the panicked citizens. Thousands of banks were forced to close, and millions of people lost their savings. Everyone was impoverished. My grandfather was forced to sell newspapers on a corner when he was 8, just to support his family. Hope came to America in the form of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was elected president in 1932 and immediately introduced his New Deal policies. The New Deal was a collection of programs and bills that were designed to solve the problems of poverty and unemployment running rampant in the country. Chief among them was the Works Progress Administration. By 1936, the WPA had employed 3.4 million people and paid each one $50 a month, causing a period of huge expansion. With all this money being distributed, the government had to print more money. However, the economy was on a system called the gold standard, where the value of paper money was backed by a certain amount of gold. If the government had printed more money on the gold standard, they would have needed the amount of gold equal in value to the amount of money they were printing. Roosevelt solved this problem by passing the Emergency Banking Act, which abolished the gold standard and made the dollar the commodity. This allowed the government to print as much money as they needed. While the New Deal helped to alleviate some of the stress on the economy, it also had lasting effects. The Works Progress Administration was originally allotted $500 million to spend. However, by the end of the Great Depression, the WPA had distributed over $3 billion. This is just one example of how the New Deal programs put billions of dollars into circulation. All this money going into circulation meant that people had more money to spend and producers could raise their prices. This caused massive inflation that reached a height of 18%. Even the tremendous inflation of the 1970s only reached 15%. But what does that have to do with today? Well, prices are still high. There was no period of deflation between the Great Depression and present day. The prices never went back down. In fact, there is still inflation today. This inflation continues to be fueled in part by the Federal Reserve's manipulation of the GDP. They try to keep the GDP high so people continue to make money and are willing to pay more. Inflation has also been fueled by the recent bailouts of large companies by the Troubled Assets Relief Program, or TARP. These bailouts put billions of dollars into circulation. Many people say that the inflation and high prices are caused by the recent bailouts. However, prices were high even before the bailouts and didn't go up significantly after. While the inflation rate has been above 2% for the past 10 years, neither has there been a huge spike in that time. Since that is when the bailouts happened, the bailouts could not have caused any huge inflation. The high prices of the modern day were caused by the desperate attempts to recover from the Great Depression. Roosevelt's costly programs accelerated the economy to an unnatural point, driving prices up. The manipulation of the GDP and the recent bailouts continue to fuel inflation, keeping prices high. So basically, money matters.